AITA for telling my sister that a comment she made is exactly why her marriage crashed and burned. My sister has been staying with my husband and I, men in our late 20s, for the last week and some change. She and her husband have initiated the divorce process, and she said she doesn't want to stay alone right now, which I completely understand. It would be very hard to go from living with a partner to a completely silent house. I opened our home to her before I found out why her marriage didn't work out. Now that the two of us have had multiple conversations about it, I'm a little uncomfortable. There was no infidelity. There was no big scandal. What she told me is that her husband wasn't having sex with her enough. The things she has been saying have floored me. She says without sex, the two of them were basically just like roommates. She said she had been pushing for him to get a hormone imbalance test done because while they were still having sex, it wasn't enough. She said he had begun resisting even normal touches from her because from his perspective, all she thought about was sex, which apparently isn't true. I'm not sure I believe that. I can elaborate in the comments, but overall it just left me feeling sad for her ex, and the disrespect of saying sex is the only thing that separates a partner from a roommate, not even a friend. I've done my best to be supportive, but I can't relate to the thought process at all. If my partner told me tomorrow that he wasn't up for sex for the next few weeks, months, or longer, I would just take care of myself and respect that. I love him and I want him to be the person I do life with forever. This all came to a head last night. My husband and I were having a typical lazy Saturday night, catching up on some shows and chatting while we lounge on the couch. His legs were in my lap and I was kind of absent-mindedly massaging his feet and rubbing his ankles. This was an innocent gesture. My sister came in, saw me doing it, and made a joke along the lines of, I didn't know you were into feet," or, "I didn't know you had a foot fetish." The exact wording escapes me. I couldn't help but feel put off at her sexualizing the gesture. Intimacy can be sexual, but it doesn't have to be. I told her so, and then said, referring to her divorce, "You sexualizing every interaction is why you're in the situation you are now." She called me a dick and left the room. I already know it was a little harsh, but I'm unsure if it was tough love or too much. AITA? Edit. I appreciate everyone's recommendation, but I do not like the dead bedrooms sub. See my comment here where I elaborate on why. Info. Did she ever try to coerce her partner for more intimacy? Seems like we're missing some context if he started recoiling at her touch. That's a huge reaction that doesn't just pop out of nowhere. Honestly, sexual incompatibility happens in relationships. Sometimes one partner has a high libido and the other has next to no libido. Neither are in the wrong and both are valid reasons for ending the relationship. Your sister isn't in the wrong just for having a high sex drive. NTA. That is weird thing to say to your sibling and thinking every time you touch your partner it has to be for sexual reasons is screwed up. You probably could have been nicer, but that's a weird thing to say. YTA. Your sister opened up to you about her relationship, and you jumped to the conclusion that she is the problem. I'm glad that, in your mind, you would be happy with your partner regardless of whether they had sex with you or not. I don't know if you have ever been in a relationship where there was a severe imbalance of sexual interest or not, but it's a pretty difficult situation, especially when the person with low sex drive has no interest in addressing the issue. For some folks, sex is just a physical act. For others, though, it is much more than just a release. It's about connection, feeling attractive, being emotionally open, etc. For one partner to say, "Nah, I'm good," illuminates a profound difference in goals and values. Sex is a symptom, not the entire problem. What your sister said is not a huge, earth-shattering, filthy comment. It's something many siblings would joke about. And given the situation she was coming from, where there was no physical affection, she was possibly deflecting some deeper feelings. Her comment was entirely uncalled for. Commenting on how other people express intimacy almost always is. But she's perfectly within her rights to not feel sexually satisfied and to want to leave a situation because of it. It doesn't make her a bad person and you a good person. How you'd each deal with a lack of sex. She's not cheating on him. She's not forcing him to be more sexual from what I can tell. She's handling this the way any unsatisfied person in marriage should. By letting the relationship end. You deciding to bring her marriage into it was uncalled for when a simple, "Don't comment on our intimacy please," would do. You decided to hurt her simply because you can't relate to her. You're also basing your feelings on an imaginary situation where the person you love is in a situation where they can't have sex with you for a reason. She was in a situation where nominally everything was average. And she recognized that she wasn't getting enough sex to be satisfied and that it wasn't going to change. Apples and oranges. AITA. I also find the comments crying about reversing it to be peak AITA behavior. This question is about how Op behaved towards his sister. We know less than Op, and Op doesn't appear to know much of anything about the relationship. Throwing the failed relationship in her face in retaliation to a bad joke is unreasonable. YTA. But only just barely. It feels like lashing out at a family member who is going through a difficult time and whose head isn't in the right place, because I don't think you can make that statement confidently or correctly. And in support of that, I'll throw your own words back at you. I can't relate to the thought process at all. I think that's the most relevant thing you said in your post. Your sister should be meeting with a therapist. It's not a foregone conclusion that she's over-sexualizing anything. And it's pretty hard to make that statement without asserting your own subjective judgment or preference on someone else. For some reason people think that's crazy to do when it comes to their favorite flavor of ice cream. But they're comfortable with it when it comes to sex. So let's lay the cards on the table. Your sister has made a major life decision to end her marriage while asserting her sexual needs. Which for people in general is a little difficult and taboo, and I would hazard a guess that for women it's even worse. If she's an actual, normal human being, I can guarantee that even if the decision is final, she's still wrestling with self-doubt and guilt on some level. Questioning her needs and wants and trying to unravel the very, very complicated feelings that people have about love and sex and relationships. And then you, her brother, someone she has trusted as a confidant, the person she came to in order to not be alone in this difficult time, told her it's all her fault. So, does that sound like a good idea in hindsight? I think it might be strongly worded to call you an asshole. But I do think you owe her an apology. If you want to be really supportive, stand behind her decision. Realize that you don't have to understand her to do that, nor do her needs and wants have to make sense to you. And encourage her to meet with a counselor to work through her feelings if she isn't already. She made a joke, you retaliated using her divorce as ammunition. YTA. Just because sex isn't an important component of a marriage for you doesn't mean it isn't for others. It also doesn't mean your sister is lesser than you for having a high sex drive. Yeah, you are a bit YTA. It really disturbs me that there are people who think that sex isn't important in a relationship. Because for a majority of couples, it is a very important aspect. If sex is one of her love languages, not being able to express that openly with the person who is supposed to love and support her can be a decimating rejection. If he's not even willing to touch her, that's a problem. if she's to the point where she wants him to go to the doctor. There is a bigger issue. This does not sound like a case where she's hypersexual. It sounds like she's feeling neglected and rejected by her husband. It sounds like she has a healthy sex drive, and there is something potentially wrong with her husband, whether that be hormones, mental health, or an affair, especially if this is a drastic change from normal. If he's refusing to even find out if there is a medical issue, then yes, the issue is him. Stop slut-shaming your sister for wanting her relationship to be healthy. NTA honestly, let's reverse it. If a guy was telling his wife, "You're not putting out enough," or, "Let's give you a hormonal imbalance test," or, "When you do get physical it's never good enough," he would be and people would call for his head on a pike. So why does it change when it's a woman? YTA. It was low to make a comment like that to her when you could have just told her the joke made you uncomfortable. I doubt she meant it the way you took it. Also, you weren't in the marriage. She can say it was about the sex, but it was probably more about the lack of communication between her and her husband that left her feeling so frustrated and unfulfilled, and his refusal to try to meet her halfway by getting testing or therapy. For example, "I have a low libido, so sex isn't important to me," and was in a relationship once where my partner was completely uninterested in sexual intimacy most of the time, but he also wouldn't communicate with me about it. If we'd had some counseling, or if he'd been willing to talk to me about what was going on with him, I wouldn't have felt so unsatisfied with our partnership. I said it was the lack of sex, even though I don't care about sex, because at the time I couldn't properly express why I was so bothered. She's saying it's because of the lack of sex, but there's a lot more that goes on there than just sex, and she's probably just not able to express all of it right now. Going through a divorce for any reason is traumatic to both parties, even the party that wants the divorce. Maybe try having some empathy for your sister, and also lay down boundaries with her if her jokes make you so uncomfortable. This is a weird one for me. I can see how your sister might have been joking with that comment, and because of everything going on, you took it offensively. But your attitude toward their divorce is baffling. I've been the husband in that position. Went through basically the same thing. I didn't not want sex because I don't like it, but because there were underlying issues in the marriage that made me feel unsafe emotionally. It wasn't until my partner started a support group and realized how he was hurting me, and made changes, that our sex life began to change and improve. Had it not, the marriage likely would have ended because neither of us was happy. We too felt like roommates instead of partners at times. So I can relate. Sex is a huge part of relationships and intimacy. Maybe you view it differently, but for most couples it is a big part of connecting to your partner and positive mental health. And I can honestly say sex is a big differing factor between partners and roommates for me. I have never had sex with a roommate. Roommates share bills and you may be friends with them, maybe not. Partners have a lot more intimacy. So I guess YTA for how judgmental you are being over the divorce. Yeah, YTA. She made a slightly edgy but harmless joke, and you hit the big red button right out the gate. I get that there's subtext here with her sexual stress, but at the end of the day, you're her brother, not her therapist. If you thought the joke was inappropriate, simply letting her know that should have sufficed. YTA first for judging your sister's reason for divorce, and second for your comment to her. Touch and sex are a vital part of intimacy in a marriage. It's part of the connection. It's one thing when there is a medical reason, but just because your partner doesn't want you, it can damage your self-esteem and certainly the relationship. I've been there, and until you are, you really should keep your judgment to yourself. Because while you may think you'd know how you would feel, you are wrong. Second, She made a joke, a pretty innocuous one, and you went straight to awe. AITA sex is important to her in a relationship. If it isn't to him, they are not compatible, and it is incredible hard to live like that. Clearly sex is not as important to you, but you have no right to judge. A couple who live together without sex are essentially roommates. Her comment may have been uncalled for, but I think you are the bigger awe. I think she was just making a joke. Jesus and people call me Generation Snowflakes? Your sister made one comment. She tried to make one joke. Do you have the right to be upset about it? Absolutely. You can tell her, hey, I don't like that. That's not cool. Instead, as others have rightly pointed out, you go for the throat and say it's her fault their marriage failed. She didn't make a series of comments. This wasn't a recurring issue. She didn't thrust her hips erratically and moan, "Oh feet," while waggling her tongue. She spoke one sentence. If you're close as siblings, of course you joke with each other. And every sibling has their boundaries. My siblings and I make racist, our own race, jokes against each other a lot. That's just how we are. If you guys naturally rib each other a bit, well, it's not like that comment was wildly out of left field, was it? Everyone has their boundaries. She didn't see it as crossing a line. You did. So communicate that like a reasonable person. I don't have much experience with romantic relationships and sexual intimacy, but I'm smart enough to know it's different for every couple, and sex can be a very important part of that relationship. My dad and stepmom had their own relationship issues besides the bedroom, but their sexual incompatibility was a big part of it. I'm also aware enough to know that I don't know everything, even about the people I love. They could have had smaller issues she didn't tell you about. They could have been feeling distant in other areas. I don't blame you for making assumptions because you're working off what she told you, and you don't have his side. The things she has been saying have floored me. She says without sex, the two of them were basically just like roommates. If without sex they were like roommates, I'm not surprised the marriage ended. You should be able to say your relationship is romantic without sex. To me that sounded like she was complaining about the lack of romance in the relationship. That without physical intimacy their relationship, romantic connection, at that point was dead. She said he had begun resisting even normal touches from her because from his perspective, all she thought about was sex, which apparently isn't true. I'm not sure I believe that. If he's always had a low sex drive, and it's only bothering her at this point in the marriage, it's entirely possible, and very likely, that the love was dying, fading already, before her complaints. Also, it's entirely possible their issues weren't just sex-related, but considering that's the main reason they're separating, of course she'd complain, talk about the sex part. She said she had been pushing for him to get a hormone imbalance test done because while they were still having sex, it wasn't enough. A lot of people say she's an asshole for this. But what's the context? Was she pushing him because she was simply unsatisfied and wanted to change him? Was it because his sex drive noticeably changed and she was worried at that point? Was it because she had tried, suggested other avenues, kinks, couples counseling, etc., and they didn't work, he was opposed to it? Did she suspect he was cheating and wanted it to be a hormone imbalance instead? Did she see where their relationship was headed and desperate to find some way to fix it? As flawed as her actions were, I don't think it was right to pressure him for a test. People do stupid things when they're desperate to change something, sex or otherwise. I've done my best to be supportive, but I can't relate to the thought process at all. If my partner told me tomorrow that he wasn't up for sex for the next few weeks, months, or longer, I would just take care of myself and respect that. I love him and I want him to be the person I do life with forever. This is a very sweet sentiment, but personally, I think it's naive. I also want to say that it wouldn't bother me. But I have no way of knowing the future or my actions in it. You're the one in the relationship. You know it better than I ever will. But people and relationships continue developing. And we develop along with it. There have been so many times I've expected myself or people I know to make certain choices based on their ideals, morals, past actions. But they still surprise me. And I surprise myself. Because the world is a chaotic, ever-evolving place. My life and some relationships are wildly different than they were this time last year. I went from being very close to someone very important to me, to extremely low contact. My parents went from lovey-dovey teenagers to hating each other. My dad went from devoted to my stepmom to bitter to completely done with her within a year. My mother went from loving her husband and defending him to death to making a close male friend when he ran back to Mexico. Even though they're still married. In less than that, both of them are married to their partners for a decade. All in all, I don't believe you're a bad person. But I don't believe your sister is either. I think YTA for your disproportionate response. And owe your sister a big apology for using her separate marriage issues that she trusted you with as an insult to her character and her love life, against something she, clearly, intended to be lighthearted and decently received. You obviously have your own standards in relationships than she does. And that's fine. But it very obviously makes you uncomfortable and it's not something you agree with. Which probably raises your defenses. And is why you reacted the way you did. Your sister may have her own underlying issues that affected the marriage but hasn't acknowledged them. But you were not a part of their relationship and shouldn't be playing connect the dots of their failing marriage. I'm exaggerating. But you get my point. You don't have the right to throw it in her face. You don't have the right to devalue their relationship issues. You don't have the right to devalue sexual intimacy, both in their relationship and others, because everyone has different standards. TLDR. You're not a bad person. But YTA. Your sister possibly has her own issues. But she's not an ass for leaving a marriage that clearly wasn't working for either partner. YTA. You really don't have any empathy or understanding for mismatched libido. Be happy it's the case. Mismatched libidos are a thing and destructive to a marriage. YTA for judging what you don't understand. YTA her marriage ending is ultimately her business. You've opened your home to her out of support and that's a lovely thing to do. But she made a joke that was a little tasteless at most. If it made you comfortable, just use your words like an adult and tell her. Don't dogpile onto her already traumatic divorce process. You went nuclear for no reason. Your sister's needs in a relationship are not for you to judge. They're her needs. Just because you would be okay with committing to a relationship in which you don't get sex for an indefinite period of time, maybe the rest of your relationship, and your partner refuses to take your needs into account and do anything to make it better, well then that's on you. But it doesn't mean everyone else would or should be okay with it. And how dare you judge someone, your own sister, who can't live like that? She was just making a joke. You're the one connecting the two issues when they're totally separate. My question is, why are you so willing to extend such compassion to her ex, but refuse to extend any of it to your own sister and instead come at her with nothing but judgment? She needs your support right now. YTA. YTA. Your sister seems as though she lacks the language to explain all of the issues in her marriage, and she's probably tone deaf as to how she's expressed herself. You, however, were unnecessarily harsh. Lack of sex and intimacy are perfectly valid reasons to end a marriage. The dead bedroom sub is full of hurt and frustration at the situation they find themselves in. Emotional withholding is incredibly destructive to a partner, and many of the people on that sub have had years of it. You sound judgmental and rude, both towards your sister and anyone facing similar issues.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Haircast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.